Hey guys, this is Austin Nakatsuka, and today we have a case that seemed to be a straightforward lens exchange and didn't end up being that straightforward. So here we have a dislocated lens that seems to be in the bag, but you can see it shimmering and moving around there. As I know this is sped up, but I had to speed it up 4 times to make this video not too long. Um, but I prepared for the Yamane because I knew that that's what I was going to do, and I was not planning to refixate this lens. I was planning to just exchange it. Um, so we go ahead and start here. And this one, luckily, is not that dislocated, so it's actually pretty easy for me to access. But I put viscoelastic here just to be safe, to protect the cornea, of course, when I'm going to lift that up into the anterior chamber to remove it. So these ones, one of the main things you're always worried about is that material from the capsule in the bag might fall to the back. So I actually don't like to open up the capsule too much. If I can take the whole lens complex out all at once, that would be the best. Okay, so here's what I did here is I used a 30 gauge needle and just stuck it straight through the pars plane. I measured to make sure I was about 3.5 millimeters away from the limbus. You can go up to 4, but I use 3.5. And so that I get behind the lens, and what that does is it just gives me a little bit of something behind the lens, almost like a scaffolding so that I don't drop it. And so there, I put that under there just to be safe, and I'm holding that with my left hand, and I just use my micrograsper to grab the haptic there, lift it into the anterior chamber, and then I secure it here in the anterior chamber by bringing this complex up above the iris. So with a iris that's not too widely dilated, if you can bring the lens up above into the anterior chamber, um, above the iris, then generally you're not safe, but you're safer and from the whole thing dropping. But I just keep that 30 gauge needle there just in case it wants to fall. And I've used this technique a number of times actually to even push up lenses that were hanging back like a trapdoor. Okay, so you see here, I widened the wound and took out the whole complex there. And the reason why I did that is because, one, when I start cutting away, there's nothing behind there. There's no capsule or anything. It's now almost like a unicameral eye, one chamber eye. So I don't want to drop stuff back there. So if I can take the whole thing out at once, it's a lot safer. And already we have problems here. You see that? Yeah, iris coming out. Oh boy. Oh boy. So we're just kind of gently kind of bringing that back here. I have a method where I kind of gently milk it into the eye and try not to do techniques that are actually touching the iris because that causes trauma to the iris there. So I just milk that cornea closed, remove any, I remove, you got to drop the pressure in the eye so that it's very low, okay? Because if the pressure in the eye is higher than it is outside, then it wants to go outside, just like osmosis. So, okay, so I got it back in. We're doing better there, but of course the wound's large, so the iris is going to want to go into it. But if it's closed up and sealed up, and I don't have too much pressure in the eye, then generally it'll stay where it needs to be. All right, I'm doing just a little vitrectomy here, just to be safe. This eye was already vitrectomized, so that's why I removed that whole complex and took it out, and I wasn't too worried about vitreous kind of attached to it. But you always kind of want to think about that. Sometimes I'll do the vitrectomy before I remove the whole lens from the eye because I want to sever any remaining strands. And here I am just finishing cleaning up, doing a really good job with that remaining vitreous there in the periphery and any remaining zonular remnants too. But here we have an issue because that iris is getting smaller and smaller. So, these blue irises or green irises are just sort of floppy. They're always floppy. Okay, careful when you're doing that opening there and that incision there because this is a soft eye right now. So you got to be careful and use a really sharp knife and we're opening it up. Okay, I'm going to make a point here. I switched over with my trainee, my fellow at this point. I went ahead and pulled out that lens myself and I switched over to my fellow and said, hey, okay, you go ahead and do the Yamane flange scleral fixation here, okay? Because I want you to learn to do that. Or, well, I mean, she should be able to do that already. We've done so many cases. So we switched over. This is her doing it. She's really great. She's done a number of them. Put the AC maintainer in. And here we are bending the needles. Okay, and so we have a very small iris here, and we know it's floppy, but I've successfully done Yamanes and uh, in irises, pupils this small. But if you're ever worried, you should put iris hooks in there. The one thing though about the iris hooks is that they can get in the way sometimes when you're loading your lens in there and you're doing all of the manipulations in there, and sometimes they can actually slip and fall back. So I'm kind of judicious about my usage of iris hooks in these situations. And here I just felt like, I've done these a number of times with the pupil that size, so no big deal. Okay, so we're getting the AR40 lens ready with PMMA haptics. That's the lens that I use prominently. Oh, and you can see iris wanting to come out. Oh gosh. But we managed that pretty well there, and things seem to be kind of okay when we injected the lens. So we thought, yeah, I mean, the haptic looked okay in there. And the pupils pulled over a little bit, but it's not bad. It's still relatively centered, and there wasn't an issue there. So we continue to proceed here. Yeah, and this is what happens sometimes. You get a little chemosis, and you want to just double check that you're in the right spot when you're making your tunnels. All right, so things look okay. You got to make your needle in such a way so that you can see it, especially in these small dilated pupils. It has to be far enough in the eye so that you can see it within the pupil. Okay, she's struggling a little bit here, but I'm just telling her, hey, work through it, work through it. You can do this. And of course, counseling on little methods to kind of get that haptic into the needle. And you got to let the needle meet the haptic. Try not to do the other way around. Don't pull and manipulate the haptic too much, but she was able to get it. Oh, and oh boy, you see that? You see that? There's a problem there. What's going on right there? Oh no. There's a big iridodialysis and the pupils pulled over. Somehow I was focused on the haptic and looking at the haptic, and I was not paying attention to the iris at this point. I did not realize that what happened right here is I think the haptic went through the iris tissue right at the pupil, and I did not notice that until I'm starting to notice it here. And I'm trying to figure out what's going on, and I realized that's what happened. And we had already flanged the haptic there, and I was looking at the pupil and I realized, oh boy, what's happening here? And this is the point where we had realized that not when we were flanging it. So I was looking at the flange, and I'm pulling it over, and I'm looking at it, and I realize, yeah, what happened is that haptic went through the pupil margin, and it must have gone through right at the point where she was putting the haptic into the needle, because the pupil was round before that. So somehow, some way, while she was kind of manipulating it, the haptic went through the iris tissue. Oh, look at that point right there. There's a little tenting there, and that's exactly where it's stuck in there. And so that's where it went through the pupil edge of the iris, and caused a problem. So we're trying to figure out what to do here. Yes. Okay, I'm sorry. So what I did was I chose, instead of cutting out the whole lens, I was thinking about cutting out the whole lens, cutting that flange, take out the whole lens. But instead, what I chose to do a little while back is I snipped the tiny, tiny little bit of iris tissue that was the haptic was going through right at the pupil margin, and freed it. So that's how we were able to do the trailing haptic and finish that out, because it was freed and the pupil's now technically round. I mean, it's released at least from the haptic. But there's still this large iridodialysis. So that's what happened over there. Iridodialysis, and opening in the iris at the limbus temporally. And that's where kind of the blood came from, because it was pulled over too much. So anytime you pull the iris away, it'll tear itself at the root near the limbus. And that's what happened there. But it's freed up at the pupil, near the pupillary sphincter, and that's where it had gotten caught and pulled everything over. Somehow, some way, I'd never seen that happen before, but the haptic went through that iris. Well, I've seen that happen where a haptic goes through iris tissue, but that I hadn't seen it while she was pulling it out, and we had gone ahead and flanged it. Because if I had seen that before and before I had flanged it and made the little bulb through the sclera, then we would have just rotated back out and then redid it through the pupil. But it had already been flanged with the bulb. I could have cut the bulb and I would have had to take out the whole lens and redo it. But I made the choice because there's a tiny, tiny piece of tissue right at the pupillary sphincter and pupil margin. I cut that tissue to release it from that haptic. And that's how it rounded out again and we finished up. But now, so I made that choice on the spot. That actually took me a little while for me to think about and decide what to do. And oh, actually, yeah, what happened was at that point I had switched over, so I had switched with her so that I could finish up this case because we were trying to figure out what to do. And and so we finished it, and the lens looks okay. But now I got to deal with the iris. Okay, so I'm looking at the iris. I'm trying to figure out what to do, and take out the AC maintainer, put viscoelastic, and I decide what to do here. And essentially, what I decided to do to fix up this iridodialysis here is there's a number of ways you can fix iridodialysis, and I have some videos of that too. And you can do a mattress suture. You can do something called the sewing machine technique, where it's kind of a running suture that goes through the iris edge um, and attaches it to the adjacent limbus. But I chose to do the flange technique with the iris. So what we do here is I took a 6.0 Prolene suture. I use a 30 gauge TSK needle like I had done for the Yamane technique. I enter there about a millimeter from the limbus, and then I enter into the iris tissue there, okay? And then I stick the 6.0 Prolene there into that TSK needle. Yeah, it's pretty long, so I have to cut it, okay? And I stick that into that TSK needle, and I make a little bulb on one end. Okay, I make a bulb at one end to catch into the iris there, and we make the bulb there, and then what we do is we actually smush it like that with the needle driver, and it creates this little bulb there. You see it? You see it? It looks like a little round bulb. It's so cute there. It looks like a little button. Anyway, and we go ahead and pull that through. There we go. So that it pulls the, you see it's pulling the iris back down. Yeah, there you can see it's pulling it back against the limbus again, okay? And then we cut the other side, leave a little bit, because you don't want the bulb to be that big. And then I go ahead and flange this side. And so here, that flanged Prolene is, you know, the tunnel's small because it's direct. It's not like 2 millimeters like the other ones are for the Yamane technique. So it's you gotta make the bulbs pretty small because otherwise there's going to be a lot of room in between. It has room for it to stick out through the conjunctiva, and you don't want that to be the case. That's something called a flagpole sign because the blue Prolene suture will stick out and can actually erode through the conjunctiva. And you can do this without doing conjunctival peritomy there. So I didn't necessarily have to open that up. I actually opened it up initially because I thought maybe I would go ahead and do a mattress there. But I chose to do this flange technique here. And I'm trying to figure out why I chose that. I think it's because I wanted to make a very small opening and not do too many holes in the iridodialysis there. So I just used that one 30 gauge needle hole and that's it. And then I decided to do one more little interrupted suture here at that sort of divot there, little tenting there. That was where I had to snip that pupillary sphincter right at the pupil border to to get that haptic free. And so this is the 4-throw pupilloplasty that is popularized by many people. I think Amr Agarwal is one of them, and there's many people who do this, of course. And you can do a Seepser knot too, of course, a 3-1-1 knot, but I believe I did a 4-throw here. Yeah, you got to be careful with all these manipulations of the suture, right? Because you can see it pulls the iris away, and there's still a little bit of a fair amount of iridodialysis there. No, I think that's blood. Actually, that's blood. So that's mostly blood left. So there's not much iridodialysis there because that patient looked good the next day. Little bit. There might be a little bit there, but I decided that one Prolene flange was enough. And so we close it up, and the pupil looks pretty good, and the lens looks good. So, yeah, this was a case that seemed straightforward and then didn't turn out that way because the haptic got stuck through that iris, the pupillary sphincter, and I had to cut that sphincter just to release it. And I hadn't had that happen where I had flanged it and I hadn't seen it and flanged it and had it stuck in there, so I had to cut the iris to release it. But it ended up being okay. Obviously, I wouldn't have liked that to have happened to the iris, but thankfully we can, for the most part, clean it up. A lot of blood still coming from there. Anytime you tear iris, there's a lot of blood. And there's still some blood clot in there, but tried to wash out as much of it as we could and um, make things look nice there. So yeah, sometimes things happen. Thanks for watching.